Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today's guest is going to talk to us about building community. You know, as a leader of transformation, we have to be able to build community and bring other people into the vision of what we have that we want to create. And so Dr. Lynette Reed is an expert in this field, and so I'm really excited to have her here. Welcome, Dr. Reed, to the Leaders of Transformation.
Hi, how are you doing today?
We're doing great.
Good.
You're like, it's like, yeah, so we're really excited that you're here. And for our listeners, let me just give them a little bit of more background on you. So Dr. Lynette Reed is a writer, researcher, and facilitator with an emphasis on human potential for personal and organizational development. She has taught courses on world religion, world cultures, and as well continuing education courses and facilitating team building and leadership training courses and sessions. She actually has written an executive summary that is called Fixing the Problem, Making Changes in How You Deal with Challenges. And she is the co-founder and board member of the Institute for Soul-Centered Leadership at Seton Cove. And she has a doctorate in of ministry in spirituality, sustainability, I can't seem to talk today, and interreligious dialogue, and a Master of Science in Communication Sciences and Disorders. So we're really excited to have her here. And we're also excited to have you here as our listener tuning in. And I trust that you're going to be inspired and you're going to be educated on what it takes to build quality community. And I think that's so important now more than ever. Technology is moving fast. You know, everybody's talking about AI and automation, all this stuff. But the reality is that you're never going to take away that community. Human beings, we want to be in community. We thrive in community. And so, but there's a disconnect there. So how do we create that? So with that, Dr. Reed, do you want to kind of unpack maybe how you got into this subject? And even there's such a diverse background of study, right? How did you get interested in this intersection of these topics?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag there when you look at it, right? I actually started in communications. I did a lot of work with, kind of interpersonal communications and things like that. And then I was introduced to some topics that had to do with spirituality and kind of caught my attention. And I was offered an opportunity to go get the doctorate. And basically, it's a doctorate of ministry in what I essentially would call world peace. Actually, one of my professors was a guy named Paul Knitter, who's actually pretty well known in the spirituality field. And I think he's retired now. I haven't seen him in a while, but he was a really good influence on me for learning about, how to connect people and how, spirit intersects with, how we live our lives. And the way I kind of look at it is, when you're looking at that spirit component, when I was doing my research for my doctorate, I was looking at spirituality and how people connected. And so when you look at it, spirituality actually it has its basis in the word breath. And so one of the ways that I kind of connected with that was, if you think about it, with every breath you take, you get to make a choice about how you're going to connect to people and how you're going to interact. And that was kind of the springboard for this whole idea of, if you are looking at personal growth and development, you're looking at, how do you connect to yourself? How do you connect to other people? And then how do you connect to the world? And that kind of sprungboard into businesses too, because there is kind of a heart and soul of every business. And so, depending on how you define spirituality, you could look at it from that perspective of, the breath and the practices that you're doing. And some people do the yoga practices, some people do prayer. There's a multitude of ways that you can incorporate that into your organization. But really, to me, what you're looking at is that kind of that inspiration, because breath, it's breath and inspiration. So, when you want to inspire your company, then you're talking about the spirit of it. We've got spirit. Yes, we do. You heard the chant. Well, to me, when you think about that, it's what you're saying about yourself and the core elements of, not like the business plan and the the product, which are one layer of your company, but you're talking about the behaviors and the connections. And so you're really kind of also talking about how do you behaviorally act with people, and how do you integrate yourself and what you believe and what you see the world and your vision as being into this group of people that you're creating in a business. And so, when I'm looking at it all, that kind of all mixed together. But one of the challenges I found when I was first starting out was that a lot of people have a hard time with the word spirituality because it means so many different things to different people. I've heard anything from religion to crystals to, there's all these different concepts out there. And so I kind of shifted the vocabulary a bit to just say, really all of us have this place within us that we want to connect, and we want to find ways to do that. And whenever you're aware of that, and whenever you have that kind of self-awareness, or in a business, the business has an awareness of it, it can really change the way you do business, because you're adding two layers together, the business plan and the product with the behavior and the concepts that you're trying to do to connect people. I think that's something that all businesses can really benefit from, is to understand those two levels. So that's kind of where I am now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I appreciate it because you've obviously studied this. It's not just a theory, but you've studied it and you realize the data is there to say, yeah, this is really how we create impact. And it's interesting you say about the spirit of a company, because I think deep down inside, we all know that. I mean, the spirit of a company, I forget who said the quote, whether it was Peter Drucker or somebody that said, the value of your company walks out the door every night. And, and yes, we have, AI and all that stuff that's coming into play that may change that dynamic a bit. But at the essence, the spirit of the company is always going to be the people and the heart and the passion that they infuse in the organization. And there's a lot of talk right now about changing behaviors, heart-centered leadership, and all of these things. Yeah. What do you see as because you're going into companies and you're teaching on this all the time. This is your life's work. Yeah. What do you see is where we're at right now from a current reality standpoint, like in terms of, and maybe even looking at the gap, between where we are and where we want to be?
Right. Yeah. Well, I started doing this probably about 20 years ago or more. And it was funny.
Before it became popular.
Yeah. It was kind of like this vast, desolate wasteland of 3 or 4 people that, occasionally would talk and say, how do we show people something that they've never really seen before? It's been around for centuries. So it's not like, we made it up. Yeah. It's been there. It's just we kind of lost touch with it. And in the past 20 years, I would say I have seen a huge jump in the popularity of it. In fact, if you Google it, back in the day, if you used to Google it, there were like maybe 5 or 6 articles. And now, I mean, you Google spirituality in the workplace. Even University of Arkansas has a spirituality in the workplace component to their business school. And so we're seeing more and more companies say, yeah, there is this element. And, if you're somebody who already understands that and has that self-awareness, then, you're already probably nodding your head right now going, yeah, that'll do it. But I think the bigger challenge is for people who've never seen it, because they don't know what it feels like or how to integrate it into what they're doing. And so, you've got a lot of people who say, critical thinking skills, which is part, that kind of that self-awareness is important, but how many of them are actually able to integrate it into the daily work day, and how many can say, okay, how intentionally say, how am I going to connect myself? How am I going to connect to other people, and how am I going to connect to the world as a business model? That other layer, that the model that's talking about your behaviors and kind of the belief structure, or some people call it the DNA of your company. That kind of that genetic code of what you're going to put people to do and say. So I think it's coming around, but and I think the other thing is fear. We've got a lot more fear now in the world. We've got a lot of, kind of dangerous things going on, more so than 10, 20 years ago. Yeah. And so whenever people are fearful, they start to seek things like that more, because they're trying to find something to ground them whenever things are a little chaotic. How do you ground yourself when you never know what's going to happen in your workday?
Yeah.
So,
well,
does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I love what you said there about self, others, and the world, because that's actually how I look at my focus, and what the Leaders of Transformation is about helping people transform the way they see themselves, the way they see others, and the way they see the world around them, and then how do they interact with each other in that whole collaboration. Like, how can we change it from a me conversation to a we conversation? And that requires building community, and it's also having that self-awareness. It starts with self-awareness, self-leadership. Right. And it's so funny because, there's a lot of this conversation going on, and yet I can talk to somebody, like recently I talked to a lady who, she's heavily involved in, she's been in supply chain management for many, many years. And she said, we can talk about it, but there's a lot of companies still out there that aren't doing that, that still are operating in the same old way. And so there's still, a huge disparity between them. And, and there's also the, we have a wellness program, and we bring in Dr. Reed, and she comes and does a little thing, let's say, and that's it. Or, and I've done those at workshops at companies where they bring me in and they say, and I say, look, if you really want change, if you really want to shift the culture, we can't do it, by checking off the box
right.
And saying, oh yeah, okay. Yeah. So we did our wellness, committee meeting for the month. I mean, the people that show up there are oftentimes not the decision makers anyway, right? And so it's the decision makers that need to be in those meetings and have those conversations. In fact, there was somebody else I was talking to recently about going in and doing some leadership programs in companies. And one of the most important things is, and we've talked about this, is rules of engagement. You've got to have a common set of rules, so to speak, or agreements on how you agree to play the game, which is behavioral ways. It's not just about the product and what you sell, but it's how you sell it. That's the brand.
Right.
So, so talk a little bit more about what you do. So you go into companies and you help them to create these shifts.
Yeah, it sounds very similar to some of the things that you're talking about. You're right. I 100% agree with you. Sometimes there's people that just want you to come in and do a little workshop, or talk about something that's going to be a motivational type of thing. But I agree with you. If you really want that change, you have to go in there and change the culture of the company and have some really defined intentional behaviors that are going to help, like you said, define not just your product, but also how you're going to act, your behaviors, what your core belief structure or DNA is going to be. And I think that's difficult sometimes because we are such a fast-paced society. And, you're talking about artificial intelligence and all those. Those are great things for helping to move things along. They're good tools, but it also will speed everything up and make everybody work faster. And it's going to open more opportunities. And with things like that, they can either be for good or for evil. They can be positive things, but they can be also things that cause challenges. And so I think that's going to be a really big component of, how do you take this faster moving society and turn it into something that keeps us grounded, as we speed along the world. And so, you're talking about rules of engagement. And so if you read the book that I the little executive summary, what it is whenever I was doing all of my research, I found some kind of common elements that kept popping up that were, consistently there anytime we would talk about these connections. And so what I did was I kind of tied three of them together And for the companies that will take, like these 3 elements, and everybody has a different way of doing it. This isn't the only one, obviously, there's a lot out there. But the way that I do it is I have these 3 elements that you can do. And if you can integrate them into your company, what it does is it kind of puts in a cycle that helps build this DNA into your organization, whether you're starting from scratch. In fact, one of the things I find that I'm doing a lot right now is I'll go start, like, help a nonprofit get started. So I'll facilitate their meetings and keep everybody on track, but then also help them to define not just their business, their brand, their business product, and all of those things, but also, what are the rules of engagement going to be as far as what is in mine, there's a personal intentional mission statement, which is a PIMS words. And basically those are, just in a nutshell, behavioral words that you have to be able to control. So it can't be a word like happy, because sometimes you just can't control if you're happy, but you can control if you're friendly or if you're compassionate, those types of things. And so you have to decide kind of as a company, what do you want your behavior of your company to be? And then find people that are aligned with that, so that could have something to do with human resources. It could have to do with, who you're hiring, who you keep in, how you value judge not only somebody's productivity, but also how well are they fitting in and creating this community that you're trying to build. And, there's companies that do that, it's not unforeign, but, it is few and far between sometimes. And I think it's a little bit more complicated when you're not aware that that's a factor, So that's the first element. The second element is aligning words and actions, because a lot of times we may say things, but then our actions won't match them. And I always ask the question, which is more authentic to who you are as a person, your words or your actions? And usually the answer is actions. Yeah, most people will say actions. And so, if you're not aligning them, that's going to break trust, because people will hear you say one thing and then you're trying something, that you're doing something else. And then if you're not matching your words that you've chosen, like friendly, with your actions, you're going to have a breakdown. And that impacts things like authenticity also. So your authenticity of your company can break down just from that one element. And then the third one is don't judge people as good or bad or wrong or right. It's kind of this is one actually that surprisingly is the one that seems to help people the most, because sometimes we put value on people as far as if they do a job, they're either wrong or right or good or bad, which puts people in the past. Whereas if you say, okay, here's a situation that's a problem and we need to fix it, Bob didn't get this done, which is more factual than Bob is an idiot. If you take it then that's going to move it forward, because you're saying, hey, Bob did not get this done, so now we've got to figure out what to do. But if you're saying, oh, Bob's an idiot, we got to get rid of this guy, you're kind of dragging it back to what happened in the past. And so if you take those 3 elements and kind of glue them together, then that's kind of a trajectory that will take your company forward with intentional behaviors that'll help kind of keep everybody cemented together.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And we're
so
talking.
That's what I use a lot when I'm doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about building community. You can't build community if you don't have rapport and trust and respect in that community. I mean, you could. It's going to be an unhealthy community. Yeah. There's always a culture. It's like, I need to create a culture. Exactly, yeah. Now you have a culture. Yeah. You just might not be the culture that you actually want. And it's a great point what you put there, because this is something that I'm a big believer in. I learned it from one of my mentors and thought, yeah, so true. And I've incorporated into everything that I do. Is there's no, right or wrong in this sense. It's about either it worked or it didn't work. That way you take it separate the person from the behavior, where like he's an idiot, to that didn't work, or what he did didn't, create an outcome that we don't want. So we need to address that, but you're not making the person bad. And that's a really, really good point, because how often, even in our conversation, we talk about right and, oh, that person's wrong. We're always, and who wants to be wrong? I mean, it's like you say to somebody that they're wrong about something, they're going to fight you, or they may accept
exactly.
and say, okay, but they're not going to like you for it if you make them wrong about it. And there's always, it's like the right and wrong. There's always this, that zero sum, game, which doesn't work. So I love that piece. So we're talking about like at a fundamental level, you can teach leadership skills all day long, but you have to start here with like even mistakes. Mistakes are good. Yeah. Right? You make mistakes. Exactly. It's actually how you learn. It's how we innovate. I was talking to somebody else earlier who was, works with scientists and said failure is part of the process. It has to be part of the process, because if they're worried about failing, that how can you possibly create a cure when you're always wanting to do things perfectly? So very, very good point. Now you talked about your PIMS process. Maybe talk a little bit more about, unpack that for us and how you use that.
Yeah. Well, what I normally do is if I come in and the company wants to learn, or a person wants to learn, because you can do it for either individuals, if you have a person in the company who's really struggling and they just want to work individually with this person to help them kind of get a little more grounded, or if the company wants to kind of more define what they're doing. But what I'll normally do is just say, okay, pick a couple of words that are core to who you want to be as a person. Do you want to be friendly, efficient, compassionate? And so they'll pick a couple of words, and you can change your words if you decide you don't like them. Later on, if you're like, nah, not so much to compassion, let's do something else, you can change them. So it's not like a set rule, but what it is it's the way to anchor yourself whenever a conflict occurs, or you get frustrated, or you have some kind of an emotional reaction to something. Instead of focusing on whatever the event is, you focus on your word and you say, okay, here's this really bad situation and somebody did something really awful to me and I'm really upset. Okay, so I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on my word and how I'm going to behave, because I can't control that other person, but I can control my behavior. And so I'm going to choose to be friendly through this. What actions do I need to take now? See, we're going into the second one. What actions do I need to take in order to present friendly, not just externally, but inside of myself? Because I need to be friendly to myself. I need to be friendly to other people. And I need to figure out a way to navigate that, because right now I'm just upset, and so that's the first step, is learning how to switch your brain around to going, okay, that I'm really upset, but I know I don't want to just go there. So I'm going to take these words and I'm going to use them as my focus point, and some people might call that a meditative type of thing, or, your kind of your keywords or whatever, but it's a way to say, I can control myself. I want to define what this is going to look like. And when you think about it, if you do that, imagine a situation where there's a huge conflict and somebody, instead of reacting and getting upset, says, I've got a thing that's really upsetting me. So I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to say, friendly is one of my words, and compassion. Now, my definition of friendly is being kind to somebody, saying, yeah, I understand your problems, but here's mine. Let's see if we can come up with compromise, and, smiling, whatever it is that you choose to define friendly as. And remember, when you're talking about these words, it has to be things that are self-motivating. If you're friendly to somebody and they're not friendly back, you can't go, oh, well, doggone it, I'm not going to do that anymore because they didn't do it too. It has to become kind of an internal reinforcement for you alone. And so you just have to practice that over and over again. And some of my people I work with said it actually makes their brain hurt when they do it, because it's foreign to them. And, it's like riding a bike or learning any kind of skill. It's the skill you learn. It kind of hurts your head when you're first doing it and you have to really think about it. But then once it becomes more rote, you get to where you don't have to think about it and you can let it go. And then it becomes this cycle that you've created, where you're able to, whenever something bad happens or you get frustrated or something falls apart, instead of reacting and going, oh, that person, they totally ruined it, you go, okay, how do I be friendly here? I mean, I've got to deal with the situation. It's not like I'm not saying, oh, that's okay, don't worry about it. It's, all right, here's what happened, number 3. It's not good or bad or wrong or right, but here's how we're going to handle it. and here's the actions we're going to take, and then following through on those actions, keeping in mind those words. And so you can see, the PIMS are nice, but they only work well if they're integrated in that whole cycle. And that's kind of the end goal. So start with the words, practice those, and then once you get those in place, then keep interacting with other people, trying to put that into your system of thinking. So it's really, systems management too, because you're changing the dynamics of how people in your business respond to crisis. So it's crisis management also. So, but more sustainable. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what I love about it too, it's kind of like, it's like almost like a mantra or core values, and saying, here are my core values. Here's how I choose to operate. But it's more than that. It's actually, or different than that. It's actually changing. It's having it's like, I'm choosing today to show up this way. And as simple as it sounds, if we were just to do that, oh my gosh, what it would actually do to, our awareness and do to our relationships as a result of that. Now, your website is expectations-reality.com. Why did you call it that? Let's talk about that, expectations versus reality.
If you look at most of the stuff, I've been doing this for a while, but the third one, the one about good or bad or wrong or right, I had a counselor friend of mine once. So, I cheated. I am not a counselor. I don't consider myself, but a lot of times I will refer people if I feel like, that's something that'll help them get focused. But one of my counselor friends was telling me that, the further away from reality your expectations are, the more distraught you will be. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting, because, if you're a person who can't bring that expectation and reality together, then you might need to go see a counselor. But if you're able to say, okay, here's this expectation I have, this person should have done it that way. And you go, okay, the reality is they didn't. If you can say, okay, well, my word is friendly, so therefore I'm going to react to this situation that I have no control over, and this is the reality of it, kind of the observable stuff, not the guy is doing it wrong, but it's more like Bob did not complete this task on time, so it put everybody off of their schedule. Okay, so that would be an example of a reality, because you can define it and everybody can agree to it. And you would say, okay, so if Bob did that, so if I'm going to be friendly about this, how do I do that in a way where I feel friendly, but I'm also doing friendly things, but still setting the boundaries that need to be set in order to make us a successful company? Because remember, it's the layers of business plan, those type of things connected to the behavior. So you're always wanting to kind of, you've almost got like two cycles going at once. You got the behavior cycle going, and then you've got the whole business part of it rolling with the behavior. And so, that's kind of where that came from, was talking about, if your expectations match reality, then it's much easier to not judge people as good or bad or wrong or right, because there's no judgment in it. It's just an observable thing that you're doing. So that's kind of how that came about. So, yeah.
No, it's great. I like that, because, there's that disconnect that we often have, and that's where that's where unhappiness comes from. And frustration comes from. And I've often said, like, choose fascination over frustration. The only reason why we get frustrated with people, and this dawned on me one point, it's like the only reason why we get frustrated with people is because they're not doing what we think that they should be doing. And who am I to be expecting, granted, when you're, when you have people that you lead and you're assigning a task, you expect them to do it. I get that. Right. But that's a task versus, we bring it and we make it so personal, and we get frustrated. And this happens in relationships too. I mean, it's our personal lives too. It's like, why are you not doing that way? Or you should be doing that. It's the classic for women, right? It's like, well, don't you know that, right? I shouldn't have to tell you that. You should know that. It's all these expectations. And as one of my other guests that have been on the show, Bill Ferguson, he talks about, when there's frustration, when there's upset, there's always a truth that you aren't willing to see. And, and it's a great point. So and another thing with your system, which is really great, is that you're having them choose the words. You're not telling them, here are the words. You're actually having them choose the words. And there's something important about that, because it's the power of choice. It's being in control. And actually people are, I believe that most, everybody's like at the core, most people are really good people. Most people don't wake up in the morning and think, how can I drive everybody nuts? It may it may seem that way at some point, with people, and you're like, that's what their whole goal in life is, because they do it so well. But it's really, that's not for most people what they want. We talk about community. They want community. They want connection. They want to feel valued and appreciated. But something that they're doing, there's a disconnect there. And so, but if you actually make them aware of it and saying, okay, how would you like to show up? Well, I'd like to be I like to be seen as friendly. I think I'm friendly, and it's like, okay, you may think you're friendly. Other people may have a different definition of what friendly is.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so if you can bridge that, and so it's great that you're actually making them aware of it, but also giving them the choice as the coach, as the consultant, to go in and saying, hey, how would you like to be? How would you like to be seen and perceived? And then, okay, what would it take for you to actually be perceived by that? Like Tony Robbins talks about, communication is the response you get. So, you think you think you're friendly, and, that's great, but other people may not see you as friendly. I'm that way. In fact, I remember when I was in grade school, somebody said to me once, they said, you're really snobby. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they said, because, and I was a real introvert. I am by nature an introvert. And so I'd walk down the hallway, and if they didn't say hello to me, I still do this tonight. I sometimes catch myself today still doing the same thing.
Right.
The other day I was in the gym, and somebody walked in, I didn't say hello. And it was because they didn't say hello, right? So I was like, oh, I guess they don't want to talk to me or whatever. That's fine. But that was perceived. So here I'm being polite, right? And or just, I walk down the hallway in the school. They don't say hello to me. So I'm not going to say hello, because obviously they didn't want to talk to me or whatever. They're in their own world. No big deal. They saw that as I'm being snobby. And you can translate that into the workplace. How often does that happen, where people have this perception, because it's their own stuff, the story, the history, all, our own little voice. That, and of course I had my little voice, right? My little voice says, oh, they don't want to talk to me, right? So there we go. And it just creates this disconnect between people of all these, it's like all these little inner dialogues and assumptions and expectations and all that craziness that gets in the way of actually having really quality relationships. So yeah.
That's right. Yeah, actually, I have a great story to that. This is a true story. I was working with this company, and there were these two people in the organization who were, they had caused so much dissension that there were sides. People in the company, it was a smaller business, and it had just turned into this nightmare of a fight between these two people. And so I went in and I was talking to them, trying to unravel what had happened. And it turned out, just the short end of the story was that the two they had all been in a meeting, and one of the people, whenever they thought, they kind of frown, when you're thinking, and so they were sitting across from the other person, and they were kind of frowning because they were thinking, and the person that was on the other side thought that they were mad at them. And they were like, oh, well, you're mad at me. Well, then I'm just not going to talk to you. So they got kind of, don't talk to me. And so that person got mad because that person was doing, the other person was getting kind of titchy with them. And it just kept escalating and escalating. And so whenever we got to the end, it was like, okay, this person, when they think, they scowl. So when you see them doing that, they're probably thinking. And the minute they saw it, they were like, oh, okay. No, and it just dissolved it all. But you're right. These perceptions, you just never know how people are going to respond to stuff like that. And so this kind of helps keep you where you don't go into that kind of a mindset where you're like, oh, okay, why doesn't this person like me? Or, and that goes into that whole value as a person thing that's also a part of this. So yeah, I agree with that.
Well, and that's even funny because when I'm on video doing these podcasts, and I'm very serious when I'm thinking. I look serious. And I'm going,
you have to remind yourself, okay, smile. Yeah.
Smile. Yes. I did a workshop one time, and, I was doing a really good job, but I was like really nervous. It was the first workshop I had done delivering this material. And I, by accident, stacked the room. I mean, just by inviting people, I stacked the room with like 5 top world-class trainers that were just people that were like, oh, I'm going to come. Yeah, I'd love to see you. And I was so stressed out because I know that they know how it's supposed to go down, basically. So one of them comes over and he's like, how are you doing? And I said, oh, and he's like, you might want to smile every once in a while. And I started to laugh. He's like, look at that. Oh my gosh, what a difference.
It works. Yeah. I do that too. Sometimes I'm thinking I'll get a serious look on my face and they're like, are you okay?
Yeah. So, and we don't realize that, how that's perceived, and people can make up all these stories about it. It's pretty crazy. Yeah. So people go to your website to find out more about your work. Who do you work with? So maybe give us a snapshot of your ideal client.
Well, I work with, it really varies a lot just depending on the time of year. I have worked with nonprofits. I have a nonprofit, and then I actually have a title company that I'm on retainer with. And so whenever they have somebody that's struggling, or, if they need some kind of coaching or something, I'll go in and work with them. I've worked with school districts. I've worked with churches, government. I mean, it's just weird because I never know, who's going to need it. Because if you think about it, if you're talking about building community, it could be any group, really. So if you're saying, okay, as a group, we want to be intentional about the way we do this, then that it could really be just about anybody. And as far as the website, one of the things I try to do on the website is make it educational also, because I want people to be able to go there and get started if they're interested. So if you actually go to the website and go down, it actually has a little section that says get started. And if you click on that, it'll actually take you to a page that will walk you through doing the PIMS word for yourself. Okay. And so if you're interested in getting started on something like that, you can go to the website and click on that, and it'll kind of give you a little page that walks you through. And then there's a couple of YouTube videos that are attached to it that are examples to kind of give you a little visual representation of what it could look like. One of them is the Terry Bradshaw. I don't know if you've seen that commercial he does with the community bank. No, it's been around for a while, and he walks in and he becomes a member of the bank family, and he's like going everywhere, pouring coffee for people, high-fiving them. He's just really exuberant in his embracing this bank that he has now joined. And so to me, I think that's a really good example of, if you look at him, what are probably his PIMS words, it's like engaged and friendly, those kind of things. So so you can kind of see things like that on the website. So it should have some good information on it. So, I got a bug flying around me. So if you see me waving my hands, it's trying to land on my nose.
Yeah, perfect timing. I'm doing a podcast. Right. There you go.
That's right.
Well, and I don't watch TV, so oftentimes people say, "Oh, have you seen that commercial?" It's like, no, I haven't. But that sounds like an interesting commercial. I'll find that link, and we'll actually make sure the link to your website and the link to that particular page. We'll make sure it's in the show notes on the leadersoftransformation.com, so they can get access to it. They're on your designated page. For our listeners who are saying, okay, how do I find that? Go to leadersoftransformation.com. You can actually put in Lynette Reed, REED, into the search, and it'll pop right up if you're coming across this a little bit later on, and there's a bunch of other podcasts that are there. So if you want to be able to go quick and find those show notes, you can do that. And Dr. Reed, thank you so much for being on today and sharing some of your experience and wisdom, and having some good laughs. And you go get the fly.
That's right. Take it outside, right?
Yeah, take it outside. I love you. I don't want to hurt you, but you got to be out there.
That's right. There you go.
Yeah.
Not right.
So, yeah, exactly.
Well, hey, have a great night. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
thanks a lot.
My pleasure. My pleasure. And thank you to our listeners as well for tuning in today. Hope you got some insights. I'm a big believer in taking action. We can think things, we can process, intellectualize about it, but where true transformation happens is when we take action. And so I would encourage you to take action today. Ask yourself, what are the words that I want to be known? Like, how do I want to show up? What words describe that? Go to, Lynette's website and go through her process and find those out. And then, and then apply it, live it out. Pick one word and just be intentional about that. And then add another word, so that you can shift the behaviors. And like I said, the communication is a response you get, that you can transform the responses that you get. You can build better community. And it really does start with us, and it starts in our businesses. We want to change the world. Well, it starts at home, and it starts in our workplaces. That's how we do it. So I encourage you that, and thank you for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Leaders Transformation real soon.